and welcome to the Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus September meeting. My name is Steve Holeko. I am the political director of the Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus. And before we get started, I'll tell you a little bit about how we do things with Zoom meetings. We are not going to put a bunch of links in the chat. And the reason for that is people tend to go back and forth and they're paying attention to the link. And, we have a really good topic tonight. So I'm going to tell you what links you're going to get in an email that we are going to send out tomorrow. First of all, how to become a member of the Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus. We sometimes get people at our meetings who aren't members and they like what they hear. So membership is free. If you're not a member, just click that link and sign up. There's also a donate link. We are all volunteer funded, all volunteer staffed, and we stay in business with small donations from people like you. So if you're willing and able, that would be great. If not, we completely understand. The third link is going to be to the YouTube recording of this meeting. We found that a lot of times people register. We had 38 people register for this meeting. Then something comes up, they can't make it, but they're getting that email as well. And so maybe they'll watch it at their own convenience. And we've also found that far more people view the YouTube video than actually register and come to the meetings. Then there will be a link that our speakers are going to tell you about tonight. It's going to be a hashtag, One Love Ohio, and there's going to be a graphic in the email. And our speakers are going to explain what you can do to help the Haitians in Springfield. That's a very timely topic right now. And then we'll have a link and a description to our October meeting. And our October meeting is going to commemorate a very sad anniversary, and that is the Israeli invasion of Palestine and the beginning of the ongoing genocide that is occurring. And we're going to have a speaker from the Cleveland Palestine Advocacy Committee. CCPC is, of course, a part of that. And that person will go over the state of affairs in Palestine a year later and, what we can all do to show solidarity with Palestine. So our two speakers, one is very familiar, our very own Deb Klein, who is also our tech person. But Deb is the director of another organization called the Immigration Working Group of Cleveland. That's an organization I am proud to be a part of myself. Our other speaker is Brian Hoffman, who is a local immigration lawyer. So Deb or Brian, who's going first?
Well, I'll just say Brian is like the best trustworthy immigration attorney in the whole area. So if you know anyone that needs any help, we'll send them off to Brian. So I just wanted to let folks know that I like to be, and I think Brian is the same way. We like to be a little interactive on this, and actually Steve will chime in as well. And because I am running the tech, it's a lot easier too. But if you have a question, a specific question about what you've heard about immigration, specifically the undocumented community, you can raise your hand. If you've updated the Zoom software, there's actually now a raise hand. It says raise hand down at the bottom of your screen, or you can put the question in the chat because we would like this to be a little bit more interactive. I'm just going to go through a couple of things. Brian's going to go through a couple of things, and then we're going to, leave it open to you all. And maybe what I'll do is just unmute everybody. Do you think that that's okay, Steve, to do that with this? Okay. So as Steve said, I'm Deb Klein. I'm actually the director of Cleveland Jobs with Justice and the Immigration Working Group Cleveland, and have been working on immigration specifically for the undocumented community since 2011. And one of the things that I want to start off with is explaining the difference between the undocumented community and refugees, because what we have going on right now down in Springfield, and I'm going to go into that a little bit more, they're Haitian refugees. So undocumented people who have come are people who have come in the country that do not have any type of legal standing or legal status, versus the refugees that are coming from countries that have temporary protective status from the government. So they are here, they have work permits, they are able to get driver's licenses. So they are in this country with documents. So it's a lot different from the undocumented community and refugees. And a lot of people do not understand the difference between the two communities. But there is a huge difference, because undocumented people are not entitled to any government services. So no, they do not get free housing. They do not get free food. They do not get free health care, or free anything that everybody is, that always they like to say. Um, and the reason why I wanted to start off with this is I'm sure that you've all heard about what's going on down in Springfield. And it's with the Haitian community, and they are refugees. They are living in Springfield. They're living, working, adding to the economy, like Brian said earlier, in the city of Springfield. It started as a joke on Facebook, and one woman said something about, somebody said their cat was missing, and a woman came out and said, "Oh, that's because they've eaten the cat." And then JD Vance ran with it. And then not only did JD Vance run with it, but then Donald Trump. And supposedly Trump is going to be going to Springfield in the next couple of days. I don't know what he's going to do there. I don't know if he's going to backtrack on what he's been saying or what he's going to do. But the whole thing that's going on there is just a travesty for these people. These are people that came from Haiti. They have violence going on, and now they're in the center of this big controversy. I'm sure you've all heard that that they've had to bring in the State Highway Patrol because there have been bomb threats at schools. They actually took all of the students from every single school, and this I don't understand this. This doesn't make any sense. But the other day they took all of the students from all of the schools and put them into one gymnasium into one of the schools. So I mean, we're so fortunate that nothing happened to these kids. But the way that they're handling it, it's a little heartbreaking the way they're handling things down there. Meaning there's a coalition of a bunch of different groups, statewide groups. We are trying to add support in any way that we can. We need to follow their lead, the Haitian community in Springfield, and ask them what they need and what they want. We don't need a bunch of us to start going down and showing up in Springfield, because we don't want to create the same environment that they're suffering that made them leave their country. So we have an ongoing social media campaign at this moment, and we will have a graphic, and then it's One Heart Ohio, right, Steve? One Love Ohio. We went through a couple of different hashtags that we were going to use. So we have a graphic that you can post on your social media. We are going to ask you, or we'll send it tomorrow, and if you could post this on your social media with the hashtag, because we want to be able to. What it does is it builds momentum and it gets out there a lot. So any place that you can share it on social media would be great, whether you do X or you do Facebook, Instagram, wherever you are on social media. Brian, is there anything about Springfield that you think that's important?
Not that you haven't already said. It's just such a travesty, and it shows how, rhetoric translates into real people's lives when your kid is getting evacuated from class because of something, somebody said on a debate that isn't even true. It drives it home for people.
Yeah, what's going on down there is just just crazy, and it's unfortunate. It's very sad, and I will tell you that one of the Haitian activists who actually lives in Columbus was just swatted. Her family was just swatted, and I don't know if you all know what swatting is, but that's when somebody makes a call to the local police department and says that, Deb Klein has this horribly wanted criminal, and I'm keeping that person in the house, and then the whole entire SWAT unit shows up. So that's something that she's dealing with. She's very afraid. So she's trying to find accommodations to be able to get out of her house for right now, because they know where she lives, obviously, or they wouldn't have been able to do that. And I'm gonna, as we go through this, I think I will just go ahead and let everybody, if you have something, you can raise your hand or put it in the chat, as I said. But I'm gonna allow you to unmute yourself, but please put your hand up or let us know that you would like to speak. Are there any questions about Springfield?
Yeah, I might add, Deb, that JD Vance started this and Trump followed up with this, and they're not backing down, even though the woman that posted her cat was lost a little while later also posted that her cat was found. So there's absolutely nothing factually to this except Vance and Trump are pretending it's real.
Jeff, did you have a question?
Sorry, this is Jeff and Amy. I just had a question. I'm trying to raise the hand, but I can't find it on here. I'm sorry, I'm really bad with this app. But I just wondered, did you know what the general city response is so far from everyone there in Springfield? Are you getting at least a positive, or is it a lot of negative feedback?
Well, I will tell you, if you all saw the debate, if you watched the debate, the ABC News reached out to the city manager. So they've been positively behind it, and they actually welcomed these people, the refugees, to come into their city. It wasn't just that the refugees showed up and they had no idea that they were coming. So there was already arrangements made with them. There was also a tweet that went out by Vance today, either today or yesterday, that said that they're basically destroying the economy, when it's the opposite. They're actually adding to the economy down there. So almost everything that you're hearing that's coming out of either one of them or the right-wing media is not true. Any other questions? And Brian, did you end up, I wanted to talk about because a lot of people have been talking about how we've had such an increase of people coming across the border. Did you end up doing the deep dive on those encounters? Because it's my understanding, and Brian is going to go into this a little deeper, that the way they're counting the people that are coming across the border is by what they call encounters with the Border Patrol, which means if I'm there and for whatever reason I have to, and correct me if I'm wrong, and then I'll let you go into this a little deeper, Brian. If I'm there and I have to go to the Border Patrol for 2 or 3 times, they count me 3 times. Is that what you found, Brian?
Right, it's exactly what you thought, Deb. So the way that they're counting encounters has nothing to do with the number of individual people who are attempting to enter the US. And there's now so many different ways for processing people. You know, before, most typically, unless you were Mexican, they would send you all the way back to your home country. More and more, it doesn't seem to matter where you're from, they find ways to just put you back in Mexico. And that makes it easier for you to try again. So we had the so-called migrant protection protocols. We had Title 42. There were all kinds of different ways that they kept people on the Mexican side of the border. So one of the side effects of that was the organized crime folks who control the back and forth flow of human traffickers essentially started coming up with these subscription plans where you would pay your human trafficker for X number of attempts or unlimited number of attempts, because they knew chances are 2 or 3 times you won't succeed, but they will keep taking you across until finally you make your way either into US custody or into the US and you're gone. It's very unusual these days to have cases where someone says, yeah, I made it across the US border undetected and I've just sort of been living here ever since. So many people now have been processed through something or another. I have clients now who've actually done the CBP1 app, where they're literally in the rain under a bridge in Mexico, sleeping in a tarp, and they're trying to use this app to make an appointment with a Border Patrol agent so they can come to the US. So the numbers that you're seeing about encounters at the border don't really paint a real picture of whether more people are seeking asylum now than before or not. And it's really hard to get at that data when you have an organization that's as opaque as not just CBP, but essentially all of DHS. It's really hard to figure out what exactly is going on. For years, a lot of us have said, well, why aren't there UN observers at the US border? Because the stories we hear about things that happen in these border patrol stations would certainly suggest, something along the Iron Curtain during the Cold War, and not what you would expect from the US. So I want to talk a little bit about just Ohio specifically, unless anyone has questions about that.
The only thing that I would say is, because we do this work so much, CBP is Custom and Border Patrol, and DHS is the Department of Homeland Security, for anyone if you're not sure what those acronyms stand for. Go ahead, Brian.
So interestingly enough, the courts that adjudicate immigration cases are part of a DOJ, a Department of Justice agency called the Executive Office for Immigration Review, which we do pronounce Eeyore, like the Winnie the Pooh character, because it's a huge bummer, just like the Winnie the Pooh character. So Eeyore operates about 65, I think, courts, or 60 or so immigration courts throughout the US. There's one in Puerto Rico, there's one in Guam. We only have one here in Ohio, and it's in the federal building in Cleveland. We used to have 3 immigration judges in Cleveland for the longest time. We're now up to 12 judges, and just before the Cleveland court, there's over 40,000 cases pending. So when President Trump was running for office, he was talking a lot about trying to cut down on the immigration court backlog, and he more than doubled it, essentially. So despite the efforts to keep adding more judges and opening new courts and adding adjudication centers and more appellate tribunals, the fundamental problem is just these cases are really, really difficult to win, and people are on trial for their lives, and there aren't enough lawyers doing this. So unless we're willing to make the whole process of applying and proving you qualify for asylum way simpler, adding more and more judges in courts is really not going to be a sustainable solution. So Deb mentioned TPS, and I wanted to explain that really quickly, because asylum is something that comes from international law. It comes from the International Refugee Convention. All of the states who are various signatories or parties or members into the convention implement their own local laws. So we have in the US, we have the Refugee Act of 1980. So applying for asylum is a right that members of all of these different conventions give to folks who are in their territory already, saying that they can't go back to where they came from. TPS is essentially executive discretion. It's a temporary protection for folks who the president, through the Secretary of Homeland Security, thinks it's impractical or unwise to send back at any given time. So a lot of times it's been used for natural disasters. If there's a huge earthquake or a hurricane, there's no point in deporting people to a country that has that level of a humanitarian disaster. And the executive branch has a lot of discretion as to who they can give TPS to. There's been a lot of arguments over the years about how dangerous Central America is, and why are so many people from El Salvador and Honduras having to go through this really difficult process of trying their cases in front of a federal administrative tribunal, when the government could just say, you know what, we recognize how dangerous it is. We will grant you TPS through a much simpler process. So if you're from Honduras, there is still a TPS for people from Honduras, but you have to have continuously resided in the US since 1998. So anybody who's been, arrived here in the last 26 years, that doesn't qualify. That doesn't help them at all. It's for people who I think were fleeing I forget what it even was, an earthquake or something back then. So Haiti, right now, you only have to have been in the US since June to qualify for TPS from Haiti. So it's being granted very liberally. You don't have to have come here several years ago. You could have come here, 4 months ago, and you qualify and you can apply right now. Which is a good thing, because there's no practical way to deport people to Haiti, let alone how inhumane it would be. And so it's a recognition that we would be wasting our resources trying to remove these people in the first place. So give them work authorization in the meantime. One of the problems we did see with TPS under the last administration, though, is what's the saying about the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away? The government can say, you know what, guess what? We're just not renewing it this year. And all of a sudden you've got 20 or 30,000 people who their work permits are going to expire, and all of a sudden they don't have legal status. So it's a much more precarious status than asylum. But the way that we give people asylum through these lengthy trials and appeals with expert witnesses is just not at all a practical way of approaching this problem. So I could go on for days about this, but what questions do folks have?
And go ahead, Gail. You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I'm curious as to what is this length of time that the folks who are not TPS have to wait for a green card? Do they have to wait until they've been offered asylum, or they've been approved, or is there anything that's giving them some opportunity to work while they're waiting?
So there are ways to get green cards through business immigration or family relationships, or things that take different amounts of times depending on which route you go. But for people who are fleeing persecution, you have to win your asylum case and then wait for an entire year before you can apply for a green card. But you can get work permits prior to that, as long as a few things go right at the very beginning of your case. There was a whole bunch of federal lawsuits. Some churches led a coalition and sued the government. And basically, you have to file your asylum application and wait for 6 months without you causing any delay on your case. And then you can apply for the government to give you a work permit. What happens a lot of times is people are here for more than 6 months or almost a year before anyone tells them this, before anyone says, hey, you could have filed this form, even though no one, sent you an address or told you what to do. But also there are all kinds of things that will stop this clock from counting to the 180 days. So if you go to court and you say, Judge, I need more time to find a lawyer, the judge says, okay, I'll give you more time, but that's delay caused by you. So I'm stopping this clock. And so now you're not accumulating time towards your work permit. Very few people within the system understand this, and a lot of lawyers don't get it right. So in so many cases, it's just haphazard as to whether for any individual person, if a few things went right at the beginning of your case, then you get a work permit, and usually then you can keep it for the rest of the case. But some people, some of whom we know who live in the Heights, they were in a situation where their clock stopped right at the beginning of the case and never restarted. And even though we're appealing 3-4 years later, those original little problems have followed them ever since. So if I were going to come up with an impossible system to navigate, I would do something like this, right?
Intentionally.
Yeah.
Well, and then the other thing is, what we're hearing is the projections for most people that have asylum cases is it could take up to 10 years for the asylum process to totally go through. I just to let you know, because I know somebody said here bureaucratic violence. I'm very close to, I used to always say young woman, but we're both growing a lot older, and she's younger than me. She's like my sister, Annabelle Barron, and a lot of people know her because she was a spokesperson for the undocumented community. But I started working with her in 2012, was able to get deferred action. She got arrested. She never went to court. She was in the ICE deportation proceedings. But I was able to work with Marcy Kaptur's office and get a stay of deportation for her because she has 4 US citizen children. But what ended up happening, it's a bad thing, but it ended up in the long run being a good thing. Her ex-husband held a gun to her head, and she was fine, obviously. But what ended up happening is she cooperated with the police and the prosecutor, and they tried to take criminal action against her ex-husband. What that did was qualify her for something called a U visa. And U visas are for people who have been that are a witness to or have been a victim of a crime. As long as you cooperate with the authorities, you can go down the road to get the U visa. Okay, so she applied for the U visa in 2013. And then after you go through the U visa process, you then can go on for a green card. And what ended up happening, she applied for the U visa, just to tell you, she applied for the U visa in 2013 to start this process. She got her green card last December, 2020. It took 10 years to go through that entire process. And the good thing for her is she did have a work permit, so she was able to work and be able to support her family. And the reason why she was in deportation proceedings, this was back when the protocol, when ICE could just basically arrest anyone and start putting them in deportation proceedings. Right now, under the Biden administration, people, in order to be deported and arrested, detained, and then deported, they have to meet certain criteria. You have to be a criminal, you have to have committed a felony, a threat against the United States. But she was driving in Sheffield Lake and got stopped by the police. We still don't know what the traffic violation was, but for a long time, it used to always be the joke is make sure your license plate light is working, because that was always seemed to be the reason for them stopping somebody. It was racial profiling is basically what it was. But to take 10 years to go through a process and the ups and downs of all that, that just tells you, yes, it is bureaucratic violence. And then I also wanted to talk a little, because both Gail and Steve were court monitors. We did a court monitoring project that we started back in 2018. And we had volunteers. Steve and Gail were both volunteers that would go down there. And we learned a lot about how the system doesn't work. Again, it's an administrative court. I think Brian said this, but when they order bonds in the immigration court, if it's a $25,000 bond or a $15,000 bond, the detainee has to raise the entire amount, not just 10%, the entire amount, in order to be able to get out of jail. During the time we were doing the court monitoring, we weren't in the courtroom, but we heard about a gentleman from Bangladesh who was in Youngstown. Youngstown has since closed, excuse me, but he went to court and the judge ordered a $72,000 bond. And by the end of the day, this gentleman committed suicide, because there would be no way that he would be able to raise $72,000 to get out of the jail. The other thing is that the judges are not, they're administrative judges. They're not from the judiciary. They are not given any kind of guidelines other than they cannot order a bond less than $1,500. So it's up to the immigration judge's discretion on how much they order for a bond. One of the good things when we were in the court, we're pretty sure that they were kind of watching what they were doing. And I was told behind the scenes that the court was pretty much afraid of us, because we were in there and we were documenting everything. But the other thing that I'm pretty sure of, because we had court monitors when they would start to talk about the credible fear, and that's when you come to the border or you come into the country and you want asylum, you have to say, yes, I have a credible fear because of what's going on in the country I'm leaving. A lot of times the credible fear area of the application, nothing was put in there. And it's actually the Border Patrol who fills out those forms. And so can I say for sure that they probably just left it blank? No, I can't, but can be pretty sure that instead of putting in the reason why they were coming to the United States for asylum, that they just left them blank. And the reason why I say that is we had one case where there was a family that was kind of just roaming around in the court area. And fortunately, we had somebody down there that spoke Spanish and she was able to talk with them. They had come across, they were seeking asylum, and on their paperwork, they were supposed to go to the Cincinnati ICE office. And instead of the paperwork, they had the address for the Cleveland Immigration Court. So they were supposed to be reporting to Cincinnati, and somebody put on their paperwork that they were that they were supposed to come to immigration court. So what we had the person that works behind the desk at the immigration court do a stamp and sign it and say that, yes, they had come to Cleveland, because if they don't show up for their appointment at the ICE office, then that could jeopardize their asylum case. So just some of the, and again, it's an administrative court. There's no due process. People are not given attorneys. There are a lot of people that end up going through this process without the help of legal assistance. So it's just a bad system all around. Steve, is there any?
Yeah, and Gail, chime in as well. I found it to be a very rewarding work, and I did it for about 3 years. We stopped doing it when the shutdown came during COVID, and I remember, we knew about COVID in January and February of 2020, and but not that there was going to be a shutdown or how severe it was, but they started posting in Spanish, because the majority of people that go through immigration court speak Spanish, and in English. Here's what COVID is. Here's warning signs and stuff. And then all of a sudden, that wasn't posted anymore. And I remember asking, there was a very friendly guard, what happened? And he was friendly even to the, people coming in for hearings. I asked him what happened. He said, well, we were ordered to take it down. And he wasn't able to tell me who ordered it. But those are the types of things that, as Deb said, it's not anything like due process that we have here. There's no attorneys, there's no jury, it's the discretion of the judge. And I never actually saw an actual asylum hearing, but I would be willing to bet that most of the people I observed in 2019 and 2020, the initial hearings, they haven't even had their asylum hearing yet. Because like Deb said, it's like a 5-year backlog of cases. So these people are in limbo for years and years and years, not knowing if they're going to be granted asylum or if they're going to be deported. One of the things that was a problem for some is they had a Spanish-speaking interpreter right in the courtroom. But there were a number of people who spoke like dialects of very different dialects of Spanish, and they needed an interpreter, particularly people from the hills of Guatemala. I forget the language they spoke, but
Quiche.
Quiche, yes. And so they would dial in to try to get an interpreter on the phone, and most times they couldn't find one. So, those people, okay, well, we can't find an interpreter, so we're going to have to postpone. Your next hearing is set for 6 months from now. There's like delays. I did see a lot of bond hearings, and one of the things that in order to be even granted bond, you have to have like a good place to stay. And I forget the term, but it was like a sponsor. And there was great variations in the amount of bond that, was granted by the judges. I mean, after a while, Gail could probably, verify this. We saw the more friendly judges, and then we saw the judges who you could almost tell they were court appointed or appointed during the Trump administration. And so you can't carry cell phone. Well, you can carry your cell phone in, but it has to be off. We would go out and we'd have to copy down the entire docket, including the case number. So it was prudent to get there about 45 minutes to an hour early. And then you want to get there maybe even a little early, because the people start coming in and they look for their case number, and so that, where they're posted outside the courtroom, got very crowded. I remember I was going in the afternoon shift, so I would get there at 11:30, copy down the docket, and then go eat lunch and come back. It was a little easier to do that. And you try to write down everything that is that you see in the courtroom. And that was a difficult task. But like I said, it was very rewarding work, because the data that was compiled amongst all the court watchers. What was that report, Deb, that you and Susie compiled?
Yeah, we did a report on what the information that we had gathered from. We started in December of 2018, so it went through 2019. We had, or maybe it was 2017 we started. We had to stop because of COVID, as Steve said, and now they do a lot of WebEx hearings down. So that's the number of hearings that are going on, and people like Brian know that we do have volunteers that are willing to go in and do court monitoring on individual cases. But we had people going in. A couple of people went in and there were no cases for them to monitor, and there was no way I was going to keep asking people to disrupt their days and go down there and not have anything that they could monitor. And Gail, go ahead. Did you have something?
No, I was just going to say, absolutely
Gail,
wasn't. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
You got it. I totally agree with what you and Steve have said, because it's humbling. And the two different situations which were the most heart-wrenching for me was when the little people came in with their moms and dads or whichever relative they came across the border with. And some of the judges actually treated those little children like human beings, and one or two were just unbelievably harsh with them. And then the other thing is when we'd be in the jail, and the person who was their hearing that was occurring that day was detained, and they're coming in their stripes and just looking miserable. And we know through all the work we did through those detention centers, right, that they were not good places to be. Are there any people still in detention?
Yes,
for that?
the two we have Seneca and Geauga County. The last time, Brian, do you have any up-to-date figures on how many are detained in each of the two jails? And it's with the county jail. The Youngstown prison was especially bad, and because while we were doing the court monitoring, now this was before COVID, so no one was wearing a mask. So this was before COVID. And all of a sudden, the monitoring reports are coming in and they're talking about how the detainees from Youngstown are wearing masks. And so we started to do a little bit of digging, and I found out that it's because there was an outbreak of mumps in the Youngstown prison, and they were wearing the masks for that reason. But it went on for over 6 months, but we were able to kick into action, get a hold of the Department of Health, and we're finally able to get that under control. But even Brian, when he was going in, would report back about the mumps cases. So we were able to do some good that was not part of the actual process of what we were doing. And that's one of the things that I missed, that we're not able to do it now. But as I said, sending volunteers in there and not have anything for them to monitor is not something that I want to keep doing. Brian, did you have anything? Or, sorry, Gail, go ahead.
I do have one more question. Is that app that's there that the people use when they're underneath the bridge, is it working any better than it was before? Are they still having problems with it? And I'll take that off air.
You know, at the very beginning, what we were hearing is it was crashing all the time and it was almost impossible to operate. It does work now, but it still takes a ridiculously long period of time to successfully navigate through it and get an appointment. And there are still the same connectivity issues or unreliable cell phones, or the only source of cell phones to make the appointments are organized crime who are selling these stolen cell phones, which creates a whole vicious cycle.
And so to go back to the myths, there are a couple of myths that I want to make sure that we talk about. One of them is that the undocumented people come in and they, as I said, people think they get free housing, free everything, that they don't have to pay for anything, and that's not true. They're also not a drain on the economy because they contribute $100 billion to Social Security, and that's $100 billion, to Social Security and the IRS, to taxes that they will never take back out. And that's the other thing, when Trump keeps saying when he gets into office that he's going to deport all 11 million people. Can you imagine what that would do to the economy? Because they're putting 100 billion into the economy through taxes, but then they're also putting more money in the economy and where they're living. So that's another one that just drives me insane, that they're a drain on the economy, because they're not. They're actually contributing to it, and they never really get anything back from it. And then the other thing that I want to point out is when someone comes across the border that is undocumented, the first time is a misdemeanor. And so they're not technically criminals because it's a misdemeanor. However, if they come across the border, they get deported back, and then they come back again and get caught, that becomes a felony, correct, Brian?
Yeah, they can charge you with a felony.
Yeah. So that's the other thing. They're not, because a lot of times you'll hear, well, they're committing crimes by coming into the country, and it's a misdemeanor. So and that's one that just people like to talk about a lot. I will tell you that one of my inspirations, not only is it Annabelle, who is an inspiration to me, but my ex-husband was actually stationed in Fort Bliss, Texas, which is in El Paso. And this was back in the late 70s, early 80s. And that was the time when the US companies were starting to move down to Juarez. And the first one that moved from the United States down to Juarez was actually Packard Electric. Now, the reason why they were doing that, because Juarez is an impoverished city on the border. The reason why they were doing that, obviously, because the labor was a lot cheaper. And here's how cheap it was. They started paying, over in Juarez, they were paying the workers 25 cents an hour. 25 cents an hour. I looked it up here to see how much the union workers, because Packard Electric was represented by CWA IUE, the union workers were making $14.50 an hour, which would equate to about $30 to $35 an hour here. But that just tells you how they were exploiting the labor in Juarez. However, I always say karma can come back and get you, and it actually did, because all of the owners of the companies and the management of the companies that were going across the border lived on the east side of El Paso. The northwest side, where we lived, were the middle income where communities. Right after they started operating, getting the factories up and going, they had this thing called they called it the East Side Stink. And so what was happening, of course, they didn't say what it was caused from. They kept saying, well, we can't tell where it's coming from. We don't know where it's coming from. Well, anybody with it's logical, if you've got these factories across the Rio Grande that have no pollution controls or no pollution standards, the pollution isn't going to come to the border and go, oops, this is the United States border, I guess we better not cross. So I guess, as I said, karma caught up to those the people that exploited the workers. That's the other thing. Undocumented workers are probably some of the most exploited workers that we have in the United States. The bosses will use deportation as a reason to make them work overtime. We had one case where there was a woman who owned a factory in Toledo. She would make the workers there go across into Michigan and do all of her landscaping, all of her snow removal, and anything that she needed done. Of course, she didn't pay them. So there's a lot of wage theft in the undocumented community. We do now have protections in place. It's called DALE, and it's deferred action. And I forget, Brian, do you know what the LE is? The LE stands for? It's deferred action for labor.
Yeah, I can't remember the last one.
I think it's for labor enforcement, I believe. But there are protections now. So if we find somebody who's undocumented, who has been the victim of wage theft or some other type of workplace violation, we send them, if it's wage theft, we send them to the DOL. So we've got the Department of Labor, the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. We've got the National Labor Relations Board, OSHA. I don't even know what OSHA stands for anymore. All these acronyms I'm trying to remember. It's Occupational and Safety Hazard. Does that sound?
Safety and health.
Safety and health. Thanks, Brian. I just call it alphabet soup. But all of the federal agencies that deal with workplace violations, if somebody goes and files a case there, they can end up going through the process. They get a work permit, they get a stay on deportation. That's where the DALE comes in. And then they can eventually possibly if the employer is found that the employer did violate labor laws, that they can go ahead and try to file for a U visa, which could then, they could end up going on and getting a green card. But the thing of it is we've got, as Brian talked about, the people down at the border, the coyotes, they will bring people in, and then we've had companies that will actually hire coyotes to bring people into the country to work for the company, charge the workers the fee, and always inflate it, charge the workers the fee for getting them into the country. Then once they're in the country, make them all live in one house or one apartment or one apartment complex, but then charge each individual worker rent. And there could be, I don't know, there could be up to 10, we've heard 10 to 15 people living in the same house and all of them being charged rent. So it's a way for the employer to exploit the workers. Because what's that? Go ahead.
I always use this example as you know, talking about like a federal level agencies that deal with labor regulations. It should tell you all you need to know about how ridiculously complicated this whole thing is. That there is a government agency called the Board of Alien Labor Certification Appeals, BALCA. And if your labor certification for a non-citizen is not granted, there is a specific board that you appeal it to. So that's how complicated this is. There are people who specialize in practicing before BALCA, and that's all they do.
Yeah, all of our alphabet soup federal agencies, but I will tell you the DOL has been very cooperative. Especially the DOL in Ohio. A lot of times the workers are afraid to go to any type of government agency because they're afraid that then that could lead to deportation. But they do not share information with other government agencies. But the DOL, I rarely have ever said that I think a government agency is a rock star, but I got to say the DOL in Ohio has been pretty good and cooperative. The other thing is that a lot of people talk, what is the cause? People ask the questions, why are people coming to the border? And most of the time people talk about violence, but there are other things that are the cause for people to come to the United States for safety. Environmental is one of them. And then also and the trade agreements is another thing, because that pretty much decimated the farm industry down in Mexico. So basically we're the cause in some cases and the reasons why people are coming to this country for asylum or for a better life. Most of the drug trafficking is coming in through the ports. It's not coming across the border. And the other thing that's kind of, I always ask this question and see if anybody can answer this other than Brian and Steve, but you know, they talk about the gangs. What's the one gang that everybody likes to talk about, Brian?
MS-13.
Yeah, take a guess where that MS-13 is. It 13 or 15?
Well, there's a bunch now. There's 13
Yeah.
and 18.
Different
Yeah,
chapters.
but take a guess where those gangs started. Anybody wanna unmute and guess where those gangs started?
In the US.
You got it. They did. So they started here and then went back across the border. So as I said, we are a cause for a lot of the reasons why people are coming to the border for safety. And I'm sure you all remembered when we had the unaccompanied children coming to the border, and people were complaining about that. And my answer back to them was always, can you imagine as a parent, if you're a parent, what it must have been like that the conditions in your country, in your area where you were living were so bad that you had to send your children off for safety reasons, because that's exactly what they were doing. So always think about what you're hearing. And I put this out here every time I talk about this. And if you ever come up against something and you have a question or you hear something, you want to know what the truth is, you can always reach out to me. Brian, do you have anything else you'd like to add? So,
Not Jeff's tonight.
and are there, all right, somebody just put, Don. Yeah, Don, we're working on this. We're actually, there's a social media campaign that we've got going on right now for the Haitian community down in Springfield. And you'll get more information about that in the follow-up email. So were there any questions or comments any of you have, or something you would like to ask?
Deb, I don't know if you mentioned this because there are so many myths, but immigrants are committing crimes at a rampant rate. And of course, the right wing will always, when there's a serious crime, say this was done by an illegal immigrant. Well, they classify people who are here legally seeking asylum as being illegal. But the reality is, think of it, you're here, okay? You want to be granted asylum. The last thing that you would do if you were an immigrant to this country awaiting an asylum hearing is commit a crime. The actual crime rate amongst immigrants is significantly lower than the crime rate amongst natural born American citizens.
Say that again, Steve.
The crime rate of immigrants in this country, the rate of crime is actually much lower than the rate of crime for natural born American citizens.
And just to follow up on that, the other thing that I hear a lot, and I'm going to try to engage you all. One of the things I hear is my family came here the correct way, the right way. I will tell you, one half of my family came to this country in 1632, 36, somewhere in there. The other half of my family, I am fourth generation. So I did have some of my ancestors did come to this country, but does anybody know what the right way was?
What the right way was, there was a lot less hoops, that for sure. But
do you know what it was?
No, I couldn't say. Maybe just sign your name. I don't know. What was it?
So they would bring the ships into Ellis Island, and they would check you to make sure you did not have any diseases or you were not sick. And then they released you into the streets of New York City. That was the right way. So we've come a long way from the so-called right way. I will also tell you there was somebody that I was working with back when we first started working on immigration, and it was somebody from an Irish family, and he found out that he grew up here, but he was not a U.S. citizen because his parents never filed for the paperwork, so he had to file for the paperwork. So a lot of that was missed through the years as well. So I don't know which one of you has a question, but go ahead. I think you said Amy before, right?
This is Jeff.
Oh, this is
I
Jeff.
just
Okay.
had a question for Brian. Do you think the Haitian immigrants have a case against Vance and Trump for defamation of character? And also just a comment, I don't know why Kamala Harris isn't going down to Springfield herself to defend the immigrants. Thank you.
Yeah, so in general, there's sort of like a public figure exception for defamation. If you have to be really specific about like this specific person is doing this specific thing. I don't think, I would love to see someone else file a lawsuit against these guys, right? But to the extent that they were speaking in these broad generalities, I don't think a court would find that there were any damages. Now, whether, if you're a business that had to shut down for a few days because the streets were unsafe, maybe there is somebody out there who you could blame for your economic losses. And it would be interesting to see if anybody comes up with that kind of a claim.
Any other questions?
I just have one more question. This is Amy. Wasn't immigration also better in the 80s and 90s compared to today?
Like the best president we've had recently for immigrants was Reagan.
Yep.
So
Believe it or
yeah.
not. And then wasn't the second best George W. Bush?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was W. Yeah. They were Republicans. Yeah, that has been some of the disappointment throughout the years with the Democrats. And I will tell you, our nickname for Obama, and I'm saying our, and I'm talking about the immigrant advocates, was the deporter in chief, because the deportations rose significantly with Obama. Yes, he did DACA and he did a couple of other things, but the deportations were. Can you remember at the height how many were being deported?
Too
But
many.
yeah, way too many. Again, a lot of the people that were caught up in the system and detained and deported, had family here in the United States. Some of them had U.S. citizen children. We had one case where the mother worked in an orchard out west of here. I don't think it was Sandusky County, but one of the counties west of here. She worked in an orchard, and they got her, and they ended up taking her son and putting him in the jail with her. I mean, and he was like 8 years old at the time. So no heart with the system. Oh, the other thing that I've heard lately, it's been brought up that the Border Patrol is patrolling the turnpike again. And yes, the Border Patrol does have the right to be here. We have a border that is only 26 miles north of us. That's the Canadian border. But also the Border Patrol can go anywhere in the country, anywhere they want. Some people will say they can only go within 200 miles of the border, but if they decided they needed to go further, like down into Kentucky or Tennessee, yes, they can. A lot of people don't realize that that's the reason why we have Border Patrol. We have a Border Patrol station in Sandusky. So yes, they're out there. We had meetings with the chiefs of Border Patrol. Detroit is the main regional office for ICE, Border Patrol, for all of the different agencies that deal with immigration. And we used to have ongoing meetings with them. And we were actually meeting with the Border Patrol, the chief of Border Patrol. And I asked him on the turnpike, I said, so why would you stop somebody on the turnpike? And he just kept dancing around the answer, continually danced around the answer. So I finally just looked straight at him and said, okay, let me ask you this. Would you stop me on the turnpike? And he just kind of put his head down and said no. So the racial profiling happens on the turnpike. Not so much now, but it used to in the past. And they're out there now. I don't know if they're trying to gear up for in case Trump is successful in November.
Deb, if I could add to your point about in the last 30 years, the Democratic presidents actually being worse on immigration than the Republicans. Of course, if we take the exception being Trump. And to Jeff's question about why doesn't Kamala Harris go to Springfield to show solidarity with the Haitians? Politically, the Republicans are winning the messaging war, and this is a sad truth. And so Democratic candidates, Democratic presidents like Joe Biden, like Barack Obama, feel they have to be tough on immigration or else they're going to look weak, in the eyes of the voters. But the reality is, no matter what Biden would do on immigration, and those of us, who look at this closely and work with the Immigration Working Group of Cleveland, we're appalled by most of the things that Biden has done. But politically, it doesn't matter to the Republicans. They got that comprehensive border security bill passed. It would have passed until Trump said, no, don't do it, because we want to keep this as a political issue. And so, Jeff, I don't understand that either. But I think that right now it's not, and sadly, it's not going to happen during this election cycle. But an aggressive counter messaging would be more effective to state what we've been saying here tonight, that immigrants actually help the economy considerably. They do not commit crime, okay? But that's not how the Democratic Party has been operating. because of political strategy decisions.
So is it Jeff or Amy that has a question?
Sorry, it's Amy. I just wanted to say I agree with you about the weakness of the Democrats because they could have fought back and said that immigrants are part of the backbone of the country, like that's normally said, and that they're very like helpful for our country, the economy. I was just very upset that they didn't fight that back and agree with that. That was wrong. Also, I wanted to ask about that bipartisan bill that Kamala keeps talking about. Is that Langford's bill or was that somebody else's bill?
Well,
Do you
I think Langford, I'm not 100% sure, but I think that he was the author, but it's the one that Trump stopped like just a few months ago, but it
Yeah.
actually would have increased the given more authority to the president to close down the border. So it wasn't a bill that we meaning the immigrant advocates would have been.
Yeah,
totally
I'm not too
in favor of.
thrilled about that either.
Yeah.
And I was concerned about that Supreme Court decision recently where they could raid homes within 100 miles of the US border. I'm just concerned how that would look if, Trump did end up winning the presidency and did this mass deportation, which is very scary, how that would look.
Brian, do you know about that?
There's always been really wide discretion within this 100-mile border buffer zone for the Border Patrol to do essentially warrantless searches. They don't have to meet as high of a reasonable suspicion standard to justify a search. But the other part of your question is really interesting because if we remember, President Trump withdrew the US from the entire UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization and withdrew from the Paris Climate Accords and from the Iran nuclear deal. So if he has a majority in Congress, there's nothing that would really stop him from just withdrawing from the Refugee Convention and saying we are no longer a party to this agreement, and so there is no asylum anymore. So there's no purpose in having court because there's nothing you can apply for. So we'll just take people right to the bus stations. That's theoretically possible given what we've seen in the past. And I think if he wins, he will have the votes in Congress because that's what there'll be turnout that swings it that way. But anyway, let's pretend that's not a real possibility and just go, stick our heads back in the sand for a few hours.
We just got to get out there and do the work.
Right, that too.
I'm taking my nonprofit hat off and going to my political one. We just got to go do the work to turn out the vote.
Well, optimistically, I saw a poll today that said Kamala was up 6 points nationwide.
Nice.
Yeah, and when we talk about how bad the Democrats have been on immigration, at least on this issue, it's a lesser of two evils. Clearly, Trump would be far more dangerous.
Right. And one of the things that we've been able to do nationally is in working, and I'm saying nationally because we're part of a national network, but the National Jobs with Justice, they were part, and we were also, Cleveland Jobs with Justice, were a part of the effort to get these protections in. And so even though Biden didn't do everything that he said he would, especially with executive orders, at least he hired the right people to be able to do other policy changes. Because they were able to get him to do the things that we really needed to get done. I mean, the latest one is anybody who is undocumented but is married to a U.S. citizen, that they could get a pathway to citizenship. And of course, good old Texas filed the lawsuit. And of course, good old Ohio was one of the 16 states that joined in on the lawsuit to stop that, and it's still going through the process. Texas usually starts it, and Ohio follows suit right away. So it's kind of disheartening. And we have, is there a recent national stats on crime rates of undocumented folks in our country? I've seen people argue stats are over 5 years old and inaccurate. Yes. I always like being able to provide data. Do you know anything more about the crime rate among undocumented people? Brian?
I don't have anything off the top of my head, but I'm sure there are some reports out there that are more recent than 5 years.
Yes, yeah, I will tell you what, I will, Lauren just asked in the chat if anyone has the information, could they provide the links? I will commit to trying to see if I can find that information before tomorrow. Before we
Actually,
send out.
I just found a study from like 5 days ago from the Texas Department of Public Safety saying that undocumented immigrants are arrested at less than half the rate of native-born U.S. citizens. I will put that link in the chat.
And that's Texas's own words.
Right. Just saying.
Yep. Anything else? Steve, do we want to wrap up?
Yeah, I gotta let my dog out. I'll be right back.
So it's it's called filler. Brian, is there something else you want to? Another myth? Is there another myth out there that people have heard that you would like to have?
Well, I did remember real quick. You were mentioning earlier about how it's a misdemeanor. So the law actually says you're not allowed to enter the U.S. other than through an official checkpoint, right? So even a U.S. citizen could commit this misdemeanor by crossing the border other than through an official checkpoint. But the way international law works, you also are not allowed to prosecute people for doing this if the reason they did it was to flee persecution and seek asylum. So in order to even determine whether you can prosecute somebody for crossing the border without permission, you first have to answer this question of, well, are you fleeing persecution and do you qualify for protection? So I've actually argued that federal public defenders should be using this argument in these criminal cases and saying, look, you have to let this person apply for asylum first before you can decide if they're subject to criminal charges. But that's one of those really subtle distinctions where, okay, yes, it's a crime, but it's not a prosecutable offense if you're doing it for the right reason. And how do you get the masses to understand those real minor distinctions?
Oh, go ahead. Amy or Jeff, whichever.
It's Amy, sorry. I just wanted to ask a question, just to verify that like the heightened violence in South America mostly comes from the United States because of the lax gun laws. The cartel are able to purchase like multiple weapons. Like I think 80 to 90% of their guns come from the United States. Is that true?
As far as I know, it is. Brian, do you know?
I mean, we know that they don't manufacture huge numbers of weapons in these countries, so they're coming from somewhere, and it's
not always it's not the cartels that are always causing the violence. It's the government itself.
Right.
And we have people from all kinds of countries that are coming in through Mexico and trying to get into the United States. And a really good example of this are the Burkina Faso guys. There were 3 guys that came over from Burkina Faso, but they did not know one another until they got here. And I don't know if they were your clients or not, Brian. But one of the guys actually witnessed his entire family being wiped out by the local police. And the only way he got out is he was able to hide while the police was killing his entire family. So a lot of the violence is by the governments, and it's the police that's also committing these crimes. So it's not just the cartels. Did you have another question, Amy or Jeff?
Oh, no, so I didn't put my hand down.
Okay, just making sure. Anything else, anyone?
All right, folks, I guess if there's nothing else, we'll wrap it up for tonight. Look for our email tomorrow. And look for updates in CCPC news and events and CCPC recommended. We actually, in CCPC recommended, we have 4 timely immigration articles a week that might be of interest. And hopefully we'll see you next month when we talk about Palestine 1 year later. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.